Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. My name's Susan Griffin, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Brain Juicer. And I have with me today Rene Huey-Lipton, who is the Executive Vice President and also the head of Brain Juicer's Global Juice Generation team. So, hey Rene, how are you?
Good. Hi. How are you?
I love it when we get to play Thelma and Louise together, if that movie reference works for our audience.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. Although I would say I would like to replace Brad Pitt with Viggo Mortensen for the movie. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. I share your opinion there, but we wanted to have a conversation this morning with you. And so we really are going to make this a conversation rather than the typical webinar with lots of words and lots of charts. So this is the most words you're going to see on a slide during this webinar today. And what we hope to do is show you some pictures that will be a jumping off point in which we can describe our premise about behavioral economics as it's applied to communities and how this approach can get you a lot farther than traditional qualitative research, namely focus groups. So a little bit of housekeeping. During this session, please feel free to type your questions into the control bar, which is that right-hand panel. You'll see something that says questions. And we'll field them at the end of the webinar, at the end of our conversation. If we don't get to them live, we'll certainly circle back with you after the webinar and answer them personally. And we'll also send out a recording following the webinar. So Rene, we now are looking at the quintessential image of focus groups. And this was the gold standard in traditional qual when a brand had a business problem and they wanted to engage consumers. Now, I've eaten my weight in Twizzlers behind the glass wall, and I know you have too in your career.
Gummy bears for me. Gummy bears for me.
Gotcha, gotcha. Can you, though, give our audience perspective on how we see that focus groups actually have been limiting us when it comes to getting information that's required when a brand is tackling a thorny business problem?
Yeah, glad to, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be here. So, I think everyone on this has probably been had this perspective or this picture at some point in our lives where, the frustration was a little overwhelming because of the constriction of by both time and guide. They're very finite, and even with like an amazing moderator and a great recruit, an engaging subject, a really creative and interesting guide, it's still limited due to time, and thus, more importantly, the discussion is then limited. You don't sort of get that sort of both the initial sort of reply and feeling and emotion, and then sort of the secondary sort of more thoughtful conversation that follows that up. And you never really have the time you need to go back and really vigorously explore the ideas that develop and emerge. And so even though you can change your discussion guide around after each session, we've all been in the back room sort of furiously typing, you can't go back and have that revised conversation with your first group or, quite frankly, any groups after that, because you can't recreate sort of that magic that happened in that first group that led to sort of some great tangent that, was going to, on the cusp of uncovering some great insight. And of course, then there's the issue of the loudest voice in the room, the most cynical voice in the room, the storyteller ad nauseum. Any of those can sort of really affect the whole sort of personality. And then finally, and most importantly, I think they were never really designed to incorporate or reflect what we now know about how we, humans, actually make decisions based on the understanding of behavioral science. Good groups can really bring up some wonderful insights and knowledge, but you're never going to come close to an in-depth understanding of how you might truly influence and change consumer behavior.
So in the in how we described this webinar, we talked about a new view of MROCs. You know, I love that acronym. You know, and MROCs became acceptable as a research tool about 10 years ago. And for anyone who's unfamiliar with the term, MROC is what the industry calls a market research online community. And as witnessed by our image on the screen, they tended to be oriented towards a brand or category affinity, a collection of super fans, and they tended to be sort of the way that a brand engaged with their consumers for a lot of things, not just for research. But Rene, can you talk a bit about how MROCs in general have evolved and how they're different and how our community is different?
Yeah, absolutely. So MROCs are really sort of have evolved, I think, to be sort of typically long-term, 3 months, longer, a year, forever, infinity, and they're typically, in my experience, and I'd love to sort of, if anybody else out there has any other experience, but large groups, 300 to 500 of companies' consumers, and these people are asked to engage every few weeks. They spend about, when they're engaged, about 20 minutes a week on average, so a limited amount of time, answering questions and doing tasks. And that's why I really hate to sort of call ours MROCs, and we don't have any fancy an acronym for it other than just calling them an immersive community, because ours is really a tight group of people, 30 to 40, an intense amount of time, 3 to 5 weeks, and a focused engagement that's built and designed around a specific marketing objective. So it's really, we make them work hard, which is fantastic. And they do. It's a really lovely experience.
So they aren't just an assembly of fanatic superfans about
No,
a category or a brand.
and not at all. In fact, we recruit specifically for each community against the set of objectives, and they're consumers who are not just interested in the subject, they're really actually living the problem or opportunity every day, and that's why we want to engage with them to sort of uncover those behavioral elements that impact their choices, even when they don't know that those behavioral elements are that they are doing them or they are engaging in them, and then by doing that we uncover the insights that provide those opportunities for behavior change, and that change that then ultimately drives our clients' business.
Okay, so you mentioned these behavioral elements. Can you talk about this notion of the behavioral lens that we use across all of our products, but specifically communities, and explain where that comes from?
Yeah, the Homer Simpson picture, I love this. Every time I see it, I want to go, dope, and start quoting the show, which is unfortunate. But so at BrainJuice, we call ourselves the System 1 agency, and for those of you who, I can't believe there are any out there, who are unfamiliar with the recent learnings in behavioral economics, folks like Daniel Kahneman, he's the psychologist who won the Nobel Prize for economics, they are really popularizing the notion that the long-term, closely held beliefs about the way humans make decisions, how we've always thought about that is actually very flawed, and that we actually make decisions from this System 1 and System 2 perspective. And Antonio Damasio said it best. He said, we think much less than we think we think. And that's true for 13-year-old boys, but it's true for all of us, unfortunately.
Indeed.
Yeah, we make those decisions much less rationally than we have believed so in the past.
It's much more emotionally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So can you explain to our audience a little bit about this notion of System 1 and System 2 thinking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so slow thinking, or System 2, is the system we normally think of as thought in the strictest sense. It is deliberate, it is conscious, sort of the ultimate in the idea of being thoughtful. I like to use the term pondering, which is just such a great word. It really sort of brings to mind, someone wandering in a garden and sort of being thoughtful.
Sort of the rational thought.
Yeah, the really sort of slow and analytical, and we think we're in control of it because we are engaging in this. And System 2 is in play when we actively consider, and I think that's a great term, actively consider what we want to, have for dinner tonight, who we're going to choose off Match.com to go out with, or when we perform, some sort of mathematical equation. Where in contrast, System 1 is automatic and unconscious and this sort of humming along continuously in the background. It sort of constantly surveys the environment, it processes incoming stimuli at sort of super speed, and it's designed to give us an impression of our environment as quickly as possible, thus allowing us to respond to it immediately, which is important in times of danger, like, Thelma and Louise, when we're about to go off a cliff. Their System 1 was humming along quite rapidly there. But for the average people like us living in a modern world, true danger and emergencies don't come up as often as they did when this process evolved. And most situations do not call for an immediate reaction. I mean, the savanna or the landscape of our ancestors is sort of our shopping mall of today, so to speak, and where we have to make those immediate decisions. And as Kahneman explains, when it comes to sort of the survival questions, the questions are perhaps less urgent for a human in a city environment than for those of us who, our ancestors on the savannah or what have you. But we've inherited these neural mechanisms that have evolved to provide these ongoing assessments of threat level, and they've never been turned off. So, while we might not need these quick and dirty impressions that System 1 provides us as much as we did in the environment in which we evolved, our brains continue to churn these impressions out just as frequently as ever. So if System 1 is probing for information that is, particularly important for sort of the biological imperatives of survival and reproduction, meaning it is sort of looking out for opportunities and also especially dangers, we can think of it as, so let's use sort of love at first sight. It's sort of, wow, we sort of see this guy or this girl and we think, wow, good looking and safe. That's sort of right off the bat, And then over time, System 2 comes along, and as more data comes in, oh, good with money, annoying driver, great cook. These are then the System 2 sort of decisions that help you make sense of sort of your first initial reaction of.
So your post-rationalization of the hot wow.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
So talk to us a little bit about how we are applying these behavioral economics, behavioral science principles to our online community, our immersive community.
Right. So, as the System 1 agency sort of focused on the fast, instinctive, and emotional decisions, we needed to sort of still put this in a sort of business context, and we needed to link this knowledge to behavior change. And so we found over the past 7 years or so that there are 3 pillars of behavior change that have the most contextual impact when it comes to decision making. And these are environmental, social, and personal. And these are the 3 that sort of really are, like I said, the ones that when it comes to decision making have the most impact. And they're, they are just like what they sound. Environmental is, so, what are the characteristics of the physical environment where the product is consumed? How visible or salient is the category at this moment, in the hot moment of decision or use? For social, it's sort of what's the socially normal behavior in the situation? Does copying play a role in the choice? And is it driven by a social need? Is consumption driven by a social need? And for personal, it's like, how am I feeling at this time, and how established is my routine or ritual? And these 3 pillars really form the basis of how we design our communities which then identifies the opportunities for behavior change and ultimately impacts the output so that our clients can affect their behavior and help the consumer change their behavior as well.
So when you talk about designing the community and using these pillars, how do we do that, and what is it that really then makes our community experience different?
Right. So I think I mentioned this earlier. We call our community the JuicyBrains Immersive Community. And when we sat down to sort of think about what that meant in terms of a design, both sort of the platform, in terms of how we approach the design of the engagement, sort of with the consumers, the 3 to 5 weeks, and how we would look at sort of the reporting in the workshop, we knew, we had to satisfy sort of 5 key needs. One, it had to be immersive, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. It had to be iterative and generative. It needed to be incredibly flexible, but it also needed to be diagnostic and prescriptive, because we need to come out of there with sort of actionable, sort of immediately actionable sort of thought for our clients. It's not just sort of like a, oh, pretty report, here it is. They have goals and objectives that we need to help them meet. And all of this, of course, is grounded in the understanding of behavioral science. Ultimately, the way the community is designed with the pillars of environmental, social, and personal, through to the analysis done through the lens of, I'm just going to call it ESP, and the output, is fundamentally different, and therefore can surface and develop things that neither we nor the client might have even contemplated when we started the project. A couple of examples would be, of course, based on the objectives, is that we look at designing our communities via sort of the System 1 or System 2 waves, rational and emotional waves, so that we can really get at the core of each relationship. The System 1 relationship with the product or brand situation, and then the System 2 or the rational engagement with that. And so we can really get at the core of each relationship without muddying those waters. And time gives us, at the time that our consumers are engaged and working hard, gives us the opportunity to dig into each of those, the environmental perspective, the social perspective, the personal perspective, individually, and sort of in the moment, System 1, and then sort of in a thoughtful and reflective way. And that's how we report it as well, the sort of the story so far, as Dominique Peters in our London office, who is fantastic, I should say, but that's how she's already called it, the story so far, as our iterative reporting, because no one wants to sort of be surprised at the end, and everybody on the phone knows this. You sort of want them head nodding in the final presentation, because we're all on board at the every step of the way. And so by the time you get to the final report, there should be no sort of giant surprises or moments of where did we learn this? But more importantly, it gives us a better chance of identifying these new tangents to follow and identifying those gaps that are so key to what we do every day in our jobs.
So talk to us a little bit about what it means when you talk about immersive.
Right. There are great MROCs out there. There's great online focus group platforms, and all of that. But again, the one thing we needed to do first and foremost is be immersive, and we create that in a number of ways. So starting with the fact that each is a custom community designed around client-specific business needs with a very specifically recruited group of people. And it's intensely moderated. We often have 2 moderators on each project, so sort of the conversation is sort of continuously flowing. And when I say flowing, it's interesting to sort of see. We use the term probing. Will this question be followed up on, or will you probe on this? Absolutely. But it's interesting to see the respondents themselves sort of challenge each other, which then gives us permission to sort of be even more, you know, not aggressive, but even more engaged, because we can sort of follow their lead there, and that's a part of being immersive, which is getting the group of people that we're working with so, you know, God, I'm using this term too much, so engaged on sort of such a deep level that, you know, they are giving it their all for, you know, weeks, not hours, not minutes, you know, but weeks. And they sustain this concentrated interaction over, you know, 3 to 5 weeks, which is really amazing. And you know, the other part of being immersive is that it's not just at your not just at your PC, it's, you know, with your phone, and, you know, when they're out and about, we're asking them to do stuff as well. And we'll talk about that later, you know, taking pictures and telling us what's sort of happening in the moment and sleuthing, and this is all very different from those affinity communities where people come in, you know, and then pop out, and unless they're like brand or category fanatics, they're not super engaged at any, you know, one time.
Interesting. Well, okay, so you have talked about this being an iterative, the characteristic of our community is iterative.
Yeah.
So tell us more about that.
Yeah, it's all about, I guess I describe it as layers. So the key power in it is that all the participants are actively doing things, you know, on their own time frame. They're telling their stories, they're posting their video blogs, they're doing sort of visual storytelling, and then they're observing each other's answers, you know, and we ask them to do that and then report back on each other's answers. They're talking to others, and this sort of layer upon layer of sort of, you know, work, respond, reflect, work, respond, reflect, really develops all these sort of new paths of discovery without compromising the structure of the community, without compromising the discipline of the brief, which is what we call our discussion guide. And it all takes place in the sort of same time and cost structure that was, you know, initially set up, but it yields so much more. And the structure of our immersive community allows for all the participants to react first, to their own question before they see anybody else's, so, you know, there's no bias, but we get their sort of emotional reaction first, and then it allows them to then ponder and to respond, and like I said, add to the dialogue of others, developing again those sort of layers of rich material for analysis over days, over weeks, not you know, a few minutes here and there.
Huh. I love the picture. It's sort of depicting that it's kind of an infinitely reflective experience.
Yeah, in a good way, because, you know, in groups you sort of get maybe the first maybe 1 or 2 layers if you're lucky of this picture, but, you know, that's what I really loved about these communities when I first joined Brain Juicer, is just, you know, the amount of layers you can sort of get on top of that. So yeah, in a good way.
Great. Okay. So you used the term flexibility. Can you elaborate on that?
Bendiness, yeah. So I think I was telling you the other day that, you know, I was putting this. I was looking at these pictures, and I immediately got some cultural capital with my kids, because like, oh, Mom, you know what that guy is doing? He's planking. I'm like, yes, I'm not a complete goober. But yeah, I mean, we also knew it had to be flexible. We are, you know, as humans, we have to sort of be bendy. We have to sort of shift and move and, you know, be flexible enough to sort of deal with everything that comes with us every day. So we knew our community had to be the same way. And, you know, we have a lot of sort of tools and modules, but that make it possible for us to be much more flexible and respond in real time to the conversations that evolve in the community. I mean, when something sort of surprises us and we want to be able to dig deeper, you know, we can shift, you know, focus again, exploring tangents that emerge, directing the right tools for the tasks. Because we're sort of letting these conversations evolve, a path may emerge that is super rich with emotional insights, and And instead of sort of saying, wow, that's really interesting, remind us to sort of follow up on that in the next group, we can sort of say, wow, that's super interesting, let's explore that now, and change up even sort of the actual tasks without impacting the time or costs, of the project.
Okay, so these conversations that you're describing are actually online. So
yes.
How does a conversation actually work?
It works like the best long conversation you've had at the sort of best party ever sort of thing, and I love this picture we chose because these guys are talking, they're focused on each other, the one guy's got his hands up, and you can tell the other guy is really listening, but he's also thinking, he's thinking in his head while listening, sort of actively listening. And I think that's sort of at the core of what we do. And it's really important, I harp on about this, it is conversation, it's not comments. Yes, it's typed in, but these aren't sort of comments like you see on a Facebook. I don't want that to sort of be the visual people have, where it's sort of like LOL, happy kitty, whatever. These are sort of long form answers, and sometimes you sort of look at the sheer amount of data that's coming in, and it's overwhelming. We did one on fashion in the U.S. with women, and we had over three-week periods, 3,800 individual sort of comments. That's not counting comments. Oh my God, I should slap myself. Individual, parts of the conversation. I'm so silly, but and that's not counting then the sort of interaction they had with each other. These were just sort of the input, the initial input that we asked for, and then when you go to sort of analyze it, you're thinking, oh, what have I done? But it is sort of, really amazing, and that's not something you can get in focus groups, or in a lot of the online focus groups, or even the MROCs. It is real dialogue, and not only between sort of the community members, as I've talked about, but between us, the moderators, and the community members, but also the clients. And the clients, it's, and when I say clients, it's not, it can be our key team, their sort of, the team sort of, anybody they want to bring in, their agencies, their design folks, bring them on, because the more we have their perspective during sort of the experience, the better the output. And, we all learn alongside of each other and identify the questions and follow-ups we want to sort of engage in. And we all sort of see how this develops over time. And, time aids in this generative nature of conversation. And we've all been there, sort of these ideas and thoughts that pop up immediately and then sort of shift and change over time, and whole new trains of thought emerge, and, it's just like this picture, this sort of conversation is going on. And because our moderators were all steeped in the language of behavioral science, while we're observing these conversations as much as we're engaged in them, so we can see how, the pillars of environment, of social and personal, are being talked about, and then we can sort of jump in and follow up and engage on those specific pillars, and sort of get the answers that the consumers don't even know they're giving us.
Great. Well, okay, you talked about some tools. You mentioned tools. What kind of tools are you engaging in these communities?
Yeah, tools, modules. I don't know the perfect language for it yet. I just call them tools. So the basis of all of them is that we as humans are pathetically unreliable witnesses to our own behavior. We really are. If I was talking to someone about myself, about going to the gym, yeah, I go all the time, which is code word for, yeah, I go once a week, but for me that's all the time. But they're thinking, wow, she goes 4 to 5 times a week. Good for her, right? So, and we sort of, fool both ourselves and others that way. But we're really good at observing others. And because we're so good at observing others, one of the modules that Brain Juicer has developed is this idea of sleuthing. And this just isn't mirror gazing. I really want to be, clear about this. We literally, once we recruit people, we give them sort of personas. Before we send them out to act like detectives, we sort of say, okay, you are Mrs. Marple, or you're Sherlock Holmes, or you're Bones, or you're Frost. I love Touch of Frost, but you're Frost, and we give them sort of the characteristics, the ways these characters typically do their sleuthing, and then we send them out, and these personas allow for a unique context in which our consumers check out other consumers, right? And then they bring their findings back into the community, and then the other community members add on top of that, again, sort of layers. They bring their own perspectives to what was seen to learn from, of course, and then including the clients. Another one of the tools that we are finding is super powerful is video blogging or vlogging, because it gives us, again, 2 points of reference. The first is their immediate emotional reaction in sort of that hot moment, that moment of sort of engagement or purchase, that first initial thing. Then, it then gives us that longer vlog around sort of ESP again, the environmental, social, and personal, that helps us understand how they are making sense of that emotion, how they made sense of that initial experience, of the environment, of their own sort of reaction to it. I was just looking at a video yesterday of, we're doing one in a project in the feminine care aisle, and it was interesting to see this woman talk about her physiological reaction to being in the aisle. And she didn't realize until the very end of the video that she was actually, as she was describing what she was going through, it was actually happening. She was talking about how when she gets so nervous, her hands shake, she gets really breathy, her voice gets higher, she sort of flushes, turns red, and at the end she's kind of like looking down at her, the camera is shaking, and she's like, oh my gosh, my hand is shaking, and my voice is high, and I am sort of breathy, and, she's having to sort of, breathe so hard, it's almost like she's hyperventilating. And so, again, there's this whole sort of, interaction between, what they're sharing, but also how they're sharing this which really sort of comes through in the vlogs. And that lens of behavioral economics is so important when we watch these, because we just can't watch them as as either an anthropologist or a person who understands semiotics, or as a strategic planner like I was at agencies for years. We really have to look at them through those things, that lens, so we can understand how the behavior is happening, how we need to change that behavior. Whether it's shopping or laundry or cooking, whatever.
Huh.
And then I'll shut up after this one, because you know me, I can talk about this forever. But
I know you're super passionate about this one. So
I'm ignoring my phone because I'm probably getting sort of texts that sort of say move on, but I have to tell this one. So this is the one I like the most, and probably because it's incredibly simple, but the pictures we get back from visual storytelling is incredible. And the behavioral economics lens here is, of course, very personal, because we're not asking them in a lot of the cases to take pictures of things or the environment. We're asking them to take pictures of their face in sort of like, what's the emotion you're feeling, in one case, like at each step of the laundry phase, right? And logically, I think, okay, we're going to get some interesting stuff. I should have known. Every person out there, and especially in this case, every woman knows that laundry is sort of this event, this actually very emotional event. And the pictures we got back were astounding in their depth. We had one woman take 17 pictures of the same exact facial expression of hers for her 17 steps of her laundry process. And she made a point of telling us that it was, of showing us how we knew it wasn't just the same picture copied 16 more times, that it actually was 17 different pictures, which I thought was, you know, really interesting for her to sort of like upload these 17 pictures and then go on to tell us sort of, you know, why it was the same face, but also the fact that she took she actually took the 17 pictures because it was important for us to sort of realize that, you know, it was for her this same sort of resigned emotion. In the same you know, community, we had a woman illustrate her own pictures instead of taking photos because she wanted to be sure that she could capture the nuance of how she felt in each of her 7, you know, processes. And these are sort of interesting little stories in themselves, but when you look at 40 or 50 of these pictures, you know, on a wall, you know, my wall up in sort of my office was just covered with these sort of literally, you know, hundreds and hundreds of pictures, but you start to see these patterns emerge, you know, and we sort of really locked it down to these sort of 7 key points in the process, and how similar the pictures were on a sort of on a longitudinal basis from these vastly different women. So anyway, I'll be quiet now, but this sort of visual storytelling is a really sort of brilliant way, because then again you get the layers, because then you sort of have the women sort of commenting on each other's and stuff like that. So
it actually sounds fun, which
it is.
A word, yeah,
it is.
And that's a word that you don't associate with research.
Yeah,
fun,
no, right.
For
it
anybody,
is
the
fun.
researcher,
Yeah.
the consumer or the client.
I think the clients, you know, I had one tell me the other day, just, you know, it's like, you know, you guys have fun with this, and you know, we've all been in the back room of the focus group, and because it's so finite, because we're frustrated, I think on some level we kind of take our frustration out sometimes on the people, and we forget to sort of, if not fall in love with our consumer again, at least sort of respect them for what they're sharing. And maybe I'm just a goof, but I love how you sort of fall in love with these people over time in the community, and not to the point where, you know, you're wearing love blinders, but just the fact that you respect, I guess, sort of what they're sharing and how they're sharing, and sort of the behavior they engage in, and thus then the behavior we have to sort of when we get to the analysis, part, the hard work we have to engage in to sort of bring everything they've shared with us to life in a really, really good way.
Well, that's a nice segue to my next question, because, okay, so the community's done their assignment. The client's been observing. You've had iterative reporting the story so far, but now it comes to this analysis, the hard work of the analysis, and what it's really going to mean for the brand. So tell us a little bit about that.
Right. So in any sort of usual research project, even an MROC to some degree, you do the project and the results are delivered at the end. But with Brain Juicer, but especially the immersive communities, even sort of the results are iterative. You know, we talked about it just a few minutes ago, the way that we design the experience then actually does impact the way we deliver the results, which I think is really important for, you know, all of us to think about who are in the project, you know, from the very beginning, knowing that this sort of iterative process is going to happen. I think it makes you be more thoughtful in both your design, but, you know, and I think any good storyteller does this. I think everybody probably listening does this as well. You're thinking of the story as you're going along, and you're thinking about sort of how the quote-unquote characters develop and what foreshadowing is going to do and when's the turn going to happen. And as you're looking and observing and engaging in these groups, you can sort of see all that sort of shift until it solidifies at the end to this really wonderful sort of insightful actionable sort of plan.
So the client
Yeah.
is really going to get something very different from traditional qual.
I think so, and you know, yes, it's absolutely sort of partly because of the immersive community and how we design it, and the people that are involved. You know, again, including, you know, the clients and their agencies and all these people, because it's about, we don't end with an insight or, you know, how this concept is working. You know, we end with this action plan for how to influence and change consumer behavior on the path to purchase. Yeah.
Gotcha. So, okay, just to put some specificity into it, what do the deliverables include?
Right. So let's say we do a 3-stage community, which in our vernacular is like 3 weeks of hard work by the consumers. We get 2 iterative reports for stages 1 and 2. That is sort of, and you know, like I said earlier, Dominique came up with this great sort of the story so far, right? Which is of all the sort of rich storytelling in terms of what was uncovered each week and how it, you know, impacts upon the objectives and how we sort of hope to follow up on it in the next stage, with sort of this final report that tells that bigger story that is unfolded over the entire community. And then there's the workshop. Everything we do comes with a workshop, and you get that full readout, which puts each of the key learnings in the context of the environmental, the social, the personal, what that context means to the brand or product, and finally insights that answer to each of these. Not insight, but insights, plural. And then during the workshop, you know, we're all exposed to that, and then we then are exposed to even more stimulus to sort of ignite new thinking around these existing insights. You know, we tear them down and build them back up. We tear down the concepts and build them back up. Whether it's, you know, even we've even done some around sort of building, you know, what's the inspiration for the creative brief to come. And of course then it's super important to have sort of, you know, the agency creatives and the agency planners there with us as well.
Great.
So it's a very interactive process all the way through. Yeah. So you know, yeah, I know I'm getting the wrap-up text. You know, let's bring it full circle. We apply the behavioral economic lens so we can take the client sort of far beyond focus groups, really to a roadmap for consumer behavioral change and behavior-driven insights that inform, you know, hopefully everything they do from NPD, you know, to communications. So.
Well, Rene, thank you so much. We've had some questions coming in, so
easy ones first. Easy ones first.
You got it.
It's
you got
early
it.
here in
you
wherever I'm
at. Okay. So Jean asked a really interesting question. The question is, you mention emotions a lot. Do you believe this process works better with women than with men?
No. No, I don't. I think it works equally as well for women, for men, for teens, you know, sort of anybody. We all have, you know, emotional reactions. In some cases, I'm trying to think if I really, in some cases it might be easier for men, sort of I think the cliche of the computer creating a, you know, distance between us and our, you know, in the conversation might actually sort of in some cases help with men, although, you know, it's every community I am astounded at what people share. And you know, we always over-recruit, and you know, we recruit 100 to get that perfect 40, you know, and we have, when they're in what we call the green room, when they're waiting, when they've been recruited and they're in the green room waiting for the community to start, we have them do a number of exercises. One of which I really love. I won't go into it, but it really tells us who is I think sort of, you know, in the most sort of who's going to share and who's going to be articulate and who's going to be, you know, and not just sort of, you know, the sort of, you get in the focus group those people who want you to really like them, so they overshare.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, these are people who are thoughtful, and we really look for that. So long answer for answer no.
Well,
I believe
actually,
it works equally well. So.
in one of those brilliant great minds think alike, Frederick did ask the question, how many participants would you recommend for a normal average MROC? And you said,
Yeah,
how many?
40.
40.
About 40.
Right.
And here's the thing, you know, we used to do much larger ones, you know, 65, 70, 80, and two things were happening. One, about a third of those were not really great participants, you know, but we still had to go through their learning. We had to go through and sort of look at what they were giving, and so it was, I hate to say sort of wasting analytical time. That's not what it was, but at this moment I can't think of a better way to put it. And so over the years we really got to a point where we said, look, you know, if we are coming up with 30 to 40 really great ones each time, we should change our process to ensure that that's who we're dealing with and only that's who we're dealing with, which is why we then created the idea of the green room and sort of how we recruit and you know, look at what they're doing. It's a much better version of when the moderator in the focus group goes out and sort of talks to people in the room, in the waiting room. Yeah, except this is deeper, much more engaged. So.
And actually, this is interesting because Anne asked a question which I think really applies to more traditional MROCs, not our MROC. She said, a practicality question: how do moderators keep track of 500 people to follow and pursue ideas in real time?
Right, right.
And
so MROCs, you know, that's luckily we don't have to do that. We, like I said, you know, 40 people. We keep it,
right.
Yeah, we keep it tight, and we do. I mean, we have typically sort of multiple people looking at any given community at any given time, and I got to tell you that the moment we miss an opportunity to probe, our clients are right there saying, "Hey, let's follow up on this." It is, you know, to use another cliche, it does take a village. But with 40 or 50, you know, you don't miss that many opportunities to sort of to raise the level of the conversation. In MROCs, it's a different type of conversation because it's a different type of situation because I don't think they're really having conversations as we describe them. I think they are, you know, sort of asking a question and then waiting for an answer, and I'm not sure they...
assembling comments like
right, exactly, yeah.
We've got a bunch of questions. We won't get to all of them. I'm going to cherry pick a few of them, and we promise you we will get back to you personally with all the questions that didn't get answered. But Frederick asked, what about multi-country, multi-language studies all on the same platform in English, one platform per country language?
Great. So let's see. We can do communities in 22 languages and dialects, and yeah, if a client comes to us and says, you know, I need you know, multi-country, then we develop the platform. We design it so that we have, you know, a group from Russia, a group from China, and a group from the U.S. And but they're all encapsulated on the platform within one project. So it's very easy for the design to sort of be consistent, the timing to be consistent, but most importantly, you know, in this case, for the client to be able to sort of interact very easily. So, yeah.
And Jean asked if we incentivize.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But surprisingly enough, we just did an audit, and way lower. I don't want to, you know, much lower than what you see in online focus groups. Probably about a third, and we're actually, and maybe someone might reach out and slap me for saying this, we're actually in the process of looking at bringing that up a little bit, because we do ask a lot of our respondents, and they should get, you know, paid a little bit more than what you get paid for when you just take an online survey. And we're trying to find that fine line between, you know, respecting their involvement and then paying for their involvement, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I'm going to take one more question, and that is the notion of this reflects consumer behavior, but have we had any experience trying the process with a B2B or professional services environment?
Absolutely. Right. We've done a number with, with any number of sort of B2B. We've done a lot with, doctors and healthcare providers, IT professional. Yes, the design sometimes is a little different. The recruit can, be a little more, specific, but absolutely it works just as well with B2B.
Great. Well, apologies to the folks for whom we have not gotten to your question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, but we're out of time. So, Rene, can you pull up that contact slide?
Oh, right. Yeah. There we go. Yeah. Please, I'm happy for anybody to reach out and ask questions as well. I think you have my Skype and, yeah, my email there. So, and my phone number, yeah.
And we'll be making the recording of today's webinar available so you can share it with colleagues. We'd love you to contact us if you've actually got a project you'd like to discuss. We really hope to hear from you again. And look, many thanks for taking some time out to actually spend with us today. We'll be sending out invitations shortly for our next webinar, the topic of which will be segmentations, why they typically don't deliver, and what you can do to bring them alive. So thanks, Rene. Thanks very much.
Thank you guys. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, please.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The organizer has ended the session, and this